It's time for On Point with Julian Phillips.
Well, welcome to another edition of On Point with Julian here. And of course, another doozy of a week. Trump front and center once again. Well, what else is new? Russia, the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. I think some of you may be old enough to remember that crazy, funny movie. I think it was back in the 70s. Well, they're playing big now on Capitol Hill, and there's rumbling from both Republicans and Democrats alike. Black Lives Matter once again, and not going away anytime soon, and that's a good thing. In the forefront, and then COVID-19, unfortunately, the rates of infection are increasing across the country. So we're going to get all into that right now, and we're going to bring in my very good friend, Eric Ham. He's joining us once again. Of course, he's a political analyst extraordinaire and a best-selling author. Eric, welcome once again to On Point.
Always good to be here, Julian. Thanks for having me.
So we've got Trump once again, but this time the Russians are front and center. Of course, the Russians were front and center during the elections, thinking that, of course, that they interfered. A lot of people say so. The intelligence people said so. But now we're hearing something different. We're hearing that from our intelligence sources here in the United States, that the Russians allegedly were paying the Taliban to kill American soldiers. Of course, Trump says he never heard the briefings, and there's back and forth with Kelly McEnany, that press secretary for Trump, and we're not getting any kind of clear indication of what's going on. Fill us in on what's happening here, Eric.
Yeah, this is a story that I think not only has legs, but I think this could just be another layer of this already perfect storm that we're seeing now that's swirling around this house. And why this story is so important, Julian, is because of what it means not only for U.S. national security interests, but also for our very troops. And we know that President Donald Trump, since becoming commander-in-chief, has draped himself in that American flag, making himself seem as like one of the biggest supporters and proponents of the U.S. military. But now we're learning that the Russians, led by the GRU, and remember, this is an entity that Robert Mueller actually indicted at least 13 of these individuals. Now we're learning that they may have been involved in actually orchestrating payments to Taliban soldiers for killing U.S. Soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan. And the question now becomes not so much if this is true, because again, this is intelligence. And so oftentimes intelligence is not about fact. It's about what our intelligence agencies, and there are 17 of them across the U.S. Government, and in terms of what they're hearing and what they're learning. And we also know that there has been payment by this Russian GRU unit to Taliban officials in the amount of $500,000. And many believe that could be the smoking gun that shows that there was, in fact, a payment from Russia to Taliban officials for killing U.S. soldiers. And now we're learning that the U.S. government has known about this since 2019. And we're hearing out of the Trump administration that the president didn't know. He just found out, but it was in a presidential daily briefing, but the president never read it. No one ever briefed him on it. Either way you strike it, Julian, this is bad for a commander-in-chief whose soldiers, whose primary mantra is to basically oversee the military. And now we're learning that either he did not know, or if he did, there still is no adequate response from the U.S. in terms of how it will deal with Russia over this issue.
So it looks like Trump, actually, if we can make this metaphor, Trump is like actually a nut in a nutcracker, and he's really getting squeezed on both sides and cracked, because we are now hearing also from Republicans who have remained silent largely for almost any infraction that this president has done. We're starting to hear from them now as well.
Well, absolutely, we are. And not just Republicans, Julian, but remember, national security is seen as a major hallmark of the Republican Party, of conservative ideology. And now we're seeing veterans organizations push back, push out, and lash out at this president over this issue, because regardless of what the response is, this is something that the president should know about, and there should be a response. And here's something that's also important. We know that the president has been made aware of this because we do know that it was in the presidential daily brief. But yet we have seen President Donald Trump, even after knowing about this, even though he says that he did not, but we have heard from him saying that he continues to want to see Russia as a member of the G8. That's a policy decision that the president is making that's beneficial to Russia after now learning that they are specifically targeting U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan.
We know that there are certain members of the American public, part of Trump's base, which seems to be eroding somewhat, that no matter what he does, they are still behind him. These are people who, fly the "Don't Tread on Me" flags. They talk about the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, our soldiers and stuff, and yet and still they hear stuff like this, and some of this is still not sinking in. And this is after, of course, we're talking about 3.5 years. We're talking about him defaming one of our heroes, John McCain, Gold Star families. What is it going to take for certain Americans to rise? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do believe we're beginning to see some of that erosion. In fact, right now, polling data is showing that the president is down 6 points with his evangelical base. He's already losing the senior citizens. In fact, that's an area where he won in 2016. He won by a large margin. In fact, it's what actually delivered Florida for him. But now we're seeing even senior citizens move away from this president. In addition to that, college-educated white women are also fleeing from this president in droves. So clearly, the president right now, a lot of the president's base is beginning to move away from him. And here's an area where even the Trump campaign, which is actually very sophisticated right now, they are focusing on non-college educated white men. They believe that they have room to grow in that area. But even now, we're seeing the president not doing as well with that base of voters as he did in 2016. In fact, we're seeing Joe Biden actually pick up and do much better than what Hillary Clinton did. And it's not that Joe Biden has to win that. He doesn't have to win non-college white men. He just has to do much better than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. And polling data is showing that. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. With the president is beginning to hemorrhage, and that's why you're seeing his poll numbers flag the way they are.
All right, so here's some other news, a little gossip, I must say. There's some talk that we're hearing that perhaps Trump may not run. I think that's kind of far-fetched, but that's out there. That's starting to leak into the media, into the press. What are you hearing about that down there in Washington?
Actually, we are. In fact, there are members. And here's what's interesting about that story, because I don't believe it. I do not believe that under any circumstances is President Trump going to just drop out, not run, and quit. But where this story is coming from, Julian, it's coming from conservative media outlets and conservative journalists. That's where we're hearing this from. You're not hearing this from the New York Times. You're not getting this from reporters at the Washington Post. We're getting this from people from the Free Beacon Journal and from Fox News that are suggesting that this is perhaps what's happening. But I just don't put much stock into this story. I think Donald Trump is going to continue to run. I think he's going to continue to lash out. And I think what you're seeing from a president is someone who is desperate and doubling down. And right now, what we're seeing is the president's message just doesn't work anymore. It's like that man who continues to just screw over his girlfriend over and over and over again. And he knows all he got to do is show those puppy dog eyeballs and say a few "I love yous," and he's back in like Flynn. Well, that just isn't working for Trump anymore.
Well, absolutely not. Look, let's switch up here because we got a few things to cover here. Black Lives Matter, of course, front and center again. Trump on the defensive again. I mean, he can't even do the rope-a-dope. He's backpedaling, and folks are going left, right, hooks, uppercuts. I mean, I think somebody from the audience is going to come and put him in a full Nelson. I mean, this is getting ridiculous. So now he's saying that he is calling Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate. What's that all about?
Yeah, again, what we're seeing again is a president who I think the public has just moved away from him on this issue. Because if you go back to 2015, this was an issue that an overwhelming majority of the public outside of African Americans focused on and believed that this was an issue that needed to be front and center in our social political lexicon. And now when you come to where we are today, an overwhelming majority of white Americans actually believe that police brutality is in fact a problem and that there is systemic racism. And so when you see the president say that this new mural that's going to go up on Fifth Avenue is a symbol of hate, again, this is a president who recognizes his poll numbers are in the toilet, and he's trying as desperately as he can to show his base, this base of voters who actually agree with him on this philosophy, that somehow that will rile them up. But what you're continuing to see is just a number of people peeling away from this president because, again, they're looking at the images that you and I are seeing, and that's causing problems for this president.
Absolutely. So statues are going down. They may go to museums. Of course, Andrew Jackson is still in front there in Lafayette Park in front of the White House. That'll probably remain there for a while anyway. But the country is changing, obviously. People are looking at things differently, and I think that is a good thing. I want to move on now to where the country is not changing so much because people are not adhering to the rules. There's no national mandate. And the infection of COVID-19 is going up in many states around the country. COVID-19, he's not taking hold of that. He's not wearing a mask. We've got now close to 130,000 deaths, over 2 million infected, rising. We are not being allowed into European countries at this point. Eric, what's going on?
And here's how we know how bad it is, Julian. This is a president who continues to say that the virus is dying out. But we're learning today that the United States has purchased all of the drug known as remdesivir. This is a drug that actually lowers the amount of time that people stay in the hospitals as a result of COVID-19. Well, the United States has purchased all of the dosage being made by the pharmaceutical company that makes this drug through August. So that means no one else in the country has access to it but the United States, because the United States now has 500,000 doses of a drug that the president claims is going away. Why does the United States need 500,000 doses of a drug if it's going away, if in fact we're not seeing a major rise? And also we heard from Dr. Tony Fauci, who said that he believed that right now where we're seeing the numbers at 40,000 cases per day, that number could go to more than 100,000 very quickly.
We need all the voters we can get at this point. We don't need anybody dying for any reason. There's nothing to play with. But my goodness sakes, this cannot bode well for him. I mean, a lot of people around the country who thought this was a hoax, who are not wearing masks. I mean, there's still some people out there who are holding fast to not wearing a mask, but most people are going for it now. You've seen the vice president wearing a mask. Mitch McConnell, I mean, my God, Mitch McConnell looked like, I don't know if it was Bonnie and Clyde, get one of those 40, and some blonde or something like that, put him in a car, in those 40 packets, one of those Tommy guns, and he looked like he's ready to rob a bank or something. I mean, I can't believe this stuff. Eric.
Well, I mean, that speaks to the level of seriousness. I mean, look, we're talking about the nation's most populous states, Florida, Texas, and California. Those are the places where we're seeing the biggest rise. And right now, if you look at where the country is July 1 versus where the country was on June 1, now you're seeing 29 states across this country going up, not going down. And this virus could overrun and overwhelm the country, even at a time when we're seeing the president who just seems to be nowhere on this. I mean, we heard from former Vice President Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential nominee, saying that he believes that President Donald Trump has surrendered to this virus because now much of the focus is on the states dealing with this. And I'll say this very quickly. Federal funding on testing was scheduled to run out this week. Right. Well, we just saw that the government actually extended that funding for the next few weeks. But we need testing to continue for the next foreseeable months, not just weeks, because clearly we're seeing the numbers continue to grow and swell, even as many people continue to refuse to wear a mask.
Absolutely. That'll have to be the last word now. I mean, obviously this will continue. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like things are going to get better. It looks like things are getting worse, but we can only pray and see. Eric, thanks so much. You're just full of all sorts of information down there in the nation's capital. I'm sure that we'll probably see you either next week or the week after. Take care, buddy.
You bet. All right, take care.
Happy 4th, by the way. Okay. Remember an old fairy tale? I guess I'm dating myself now. The Emperor's New Clothes. It was a fairy tale about this emperor who wanted a new wardrobe or whatever. I can't remember all the details, but he was actually, and I can say this, I think this is good enough for here, he was buck naked. And nobody had the courage to tell the emperor that although he thought he was fully clothed, that he wasn't wearing any clothes. Uh, could art be imitating life here? Could some folks now have the courage to say that number 45 is not wearing any clothes? We're starting to see the polls now plummet against him, his base eroding. As Eric Ham pointed out, evangelicals now are running away from him. Some people like even Sean Hannity and Steve Doocy on Fox News are urging people now to start wearing masks. Could it be that some people now have the moral courage to say that President Donald Trump perhaps is not wearing any clothes? Maybe they'll say he still has on some underwear, but I'm kind of wondering. Look, this is serious business. You have a right to like this president or not. That's what our country is about. But we are facing some serious times here, and the numbers don't lie. With the people that are dying in this country, those who are screaming out for justice. We are losing credibility with our allies, NATO. We are not being allowed into countries now because of what's going on. So you really can't deny these things, no matter what you believe. Fact is fact. We are a country now that has a president that perhaps is not wearing any clothes. November can't come soon enough. Those of us who are going to be galvanized to get out to the polls, do so. The remedy here is to vote, vote, vote. The question is, what disaster lays, what scorched earth lays in our midst until that time? Only time can tell. Thanks for joining me on Point, and we'll see you again soon. Be safe.